Chapter 67, Taking Over the Guild. Kreis evaluated the situation and quickly identified the most efficient way to turn it into an advantage. Even if it's called a thief guild, when you look closely, it's essentially a business. Collecting protection fees, eliminating petty thefts, and leveraging only the positives could turn it into a proper enterprise. More importantly, Kreis already had business ideas centered around the thief guild. This was Border Guard, a place known for its strict law enforcement. Normally, a criminal guild wouldn't thrive here. But this wasn't the case now. Gilpin's guild had managed to establish itself quite effectively. Whatever they had done wasn't achievable by ordinary means. For instance, the thermal pelts, how much were those worth? And here were over a dozen of them. There were also coins and notes worth more than 100,000 kroner. Although some IOUs turned up, they didn't seem particularly useful. If Kreis could consolidate his plans with the resources of this guild, there's no way I'd lose out. This involved money, and Kreis applied his wisdom, worthy of a sage, to assess and accept the situation. Become thieves? Ingrid repeated the suggestion, staring at Kreis. He had said his dream was to become a knight, to reach greater heights. Proper training and quality equipment would require kroner. Knights were, after all, professionals who also earned through war. They weren't called masters of slaughter for no reason. You don't need to think of it as a bad thing. Gilpin's crew is finished now. How long do you think it will take before another thief guild takes its place? Kreis's mind was racing, calculating. Blood pumped through his brain, fueling its rotation. Given Gilpin's setup, this was a golden opportunity. At most, a month. Ingrid nodded instinctively, agreeing with the assessment. It's so warm. From the side, REM exclaimed, wearing a coat made of thermal pelt. Well, of course, it's warm. Ragnar scolded him for stating the obvious. Kreis's voice brought Ingrid back into focus. Calm but with a subtle intensity hidden beneath, Kreis spoke. In that case, we leave Gilpin, who seems decent, in charge. Then we reform the guild into one that doesn't kill or steal. It was a plausible idea, genuinely tempting. Preserving honor as a knight? Even that required kroner. Ingrid was well aware of reality. Sure, knights of a certain skill could have wealth come to them naturally. But there were also knights who worked for money. Ingrid believed that a knight's honor was about following one's principles. Kreis's suggestion didn't conflict with that. Viewed positively, it even seemed like a better option. If it improves people's lives, even slightly, then fewer children would cry. Parents raising their children would have less to worry about. Every city had its share of people struggling to survive. Perhaps this would provide them with some comfort. Initially, they had only been looking for firewood to survive the winter, but if this opportunity allowed them to help others, there was no reason not to take it. Doesn't sound bad, does it? Not at all. I'll divide the profits appropriately and give your share, squad leader. In return, please keep the other squad members in check. Ingrid realized why Kreis was so focused on convincing him. It was because of REM and the others. If Kreis announced his intentions to take over the guild, they wouldn't simply let it happen. What's in it for you? Ingrid was curious. Why go to the trouble of taking over a thief guild and even paying dues? Did Kreis know how much profit he could actually expect? Information. Ingrid was once again impressed by Kreis's sharp intellect. Information was valuable. Even trivial details within a city could translate into useful resources for the unit. For instance, even knowing the name and hobby of a flower shop girl could have people lining up to buy that information. There were countless other ways it could be utilized. You catch on fast. That's why I like you, squad leader. Kreis extended his fist, and Ingrid met it with his own. That sealed the deal. Ingrid would gain kroner and keep the other squad members in line. Kreis would secure the guild for himself. When Ingrid returned to the fireplace, I don't mind. Let Kreis take it, Jackson said first. A terrifying man. His hearing was unnervingly sharp. They had spoken at least 10 steps away, but he still overheard. Gilpin, sort out the corpses and identify anyone who has committed murder, inflicted significant harm on the weak, or could cause future problems. We'll take them to prison. This didn't mean they'd let things slide as they were. Seems like you'll have to hand over a few people. And from now on, this guy is the guild leader. You're free to stay, but if you quit and start another guild, we'll meet again. I wouldn't dare. Gilpin habitually scratched his sandy-blonde hair and asked hesitantly. But, soldier. What is it? I think disbanding is the better choice. If we stay, we'll all end up dead. Dead? Why? Incrid's gaze demanded an explanation. Gilpin hesitated but eventually explained the situation. It turned out that the deceased guild leader had been working as an agent for Aspen, not just a spy but someone who handled various tasks for them. There's someone who regularly checks on the guild's situation. Otherwise, we would have disbanded and disappeared long ago. Despite his seemingly gentle demeanor and care for his people, Gilpin was still part of a thief guild. He wasn't in his position by mere chance. The visitor, however, was the problem. If the dead guy doesn't show up, it'll cause an uproar. We were already planning to sell off the estate at a low price and disappear entirely. How many people are we talking about? It's just one person, but... They're a frog. The children of heart-stopping terror. A race with physical strength far surpassing that of humans, bred for combat. Incrid had once been kicked by a frog and ended up in the infirmary for it. A frog, coming here. Yes. Now, what should they do? But why would a frog monitor a small thief guild in a border city? There's a saying that any frog found outside their territory is already a recognized elite. By Norilia's military standards, they would be at least a special grade warrior. What's so special about this place? Only the dead guy would know the full details. What's certain is that the frog always brought funds, krona, for operations. Not taking money, but giving it? Seriously, what is this? Even Kreis couldn't deduce the reason. How curious. Everyone else was equally puzzled. So, what now? The guild is ours. Nothing changed. There was still time before the frog arrived. Whatever came next, they would deal with it when it happened. Or perhaps, when the time came, they could disband and abandon their plans altogether. And so, they decided to take over the guild completely. Gilpin had no complaints. He considered himself fortunate just to be alive. Incrid, however, couldn't shake the thought that although these thieves agreed now, they might pose problems in the future. Would such a group really stay obedient indefinitely? Of course, this was Kreis's problem to handle from now on. He had agreed to take responsibility, and Incrid left it at that. This one's mine. Jackson collected a few rings and ornaments, likely intended for a woman. IM grabbed a heated coat and some furs to use as bedding, then began rummaging through the vault to see what else it held. Ragnar briefly examined the swords amassed by the guild, dismissing them all as junk. After that, he showed no further interest in wealth. Audin was the same. They say a gaze fixed on riches blinds the soul. He simply offered a prayer. But when Incrid asked for his help, Audin complied. Could you open the vault? Yes, brother. The guild leader's vault was securely locked with a heavy padlock, wrapped tightly in chains. Audin stepped forward and took hold of the lock. Crunch. What followed was practically a feat of superhuman strength. With his bare hands, Audin crushed the lock. It was almost unbelievable. Well, aren't you a strong one? REM remarked in awe. Once the lock was destroyed, the chains were no longer an issue. What would have required hours with a hacksaw was finished in an instant. This was the strength of a squad member capable of opening locked doors with just a knock. Curious about what the vault contained, Incrid walked over briskly. Are you going to open it yourself? REM asked, looking at him. Why not? Pure curiosity drove him. As he approached the vault, Incrid posed a question. So, when is that frog supposed to arrive? Walking alongside him, Gilpin replied, when the first season begins. They come once at the start of the 4 seasons and once in the 3rd season. Once in spring and once in autumn. That meant there was still time. Incrid nodded and positioned himself before the vault. What could be inside? He was eager to find out. With a flick of his fingers, he lifted the latch. Screech! The rusty hinges made a grating sound as the lid was pushed back. Thunk! The heavy lid fell open, hitting the vault body with a loud clang. The sound reverberated faintly in Incrid's ears. Tomb! Tomb! Boom! He felt something indescribable envelop him. It couldn't be seen or touched, but he sensed something wrapping around his body. A sudden isolation from the world overwhelmed him. Everyone around him seemed to vanish. When he tried to blink, his body didn't respond. What is this? Even opening his mouth was impossible. What's in there? Something good. IM's voice snapped him back to reality. Ingrid blinked and opened his mouth, finding himself unharmed. Did something feel odd just now? Squad leader, you're always a bit odd. I know that well, IM replied with his usual quip. No one else seemed to notice anything unusual. Dismissing IM's nonsense, Ingrid chalked it up to his imagination. Let's see what we've got here. He shook his head lightly and examined the contents. Inside the vault lay a leather cuirass. What's this? Ingrid voiced his curiosity and looked at Gilpin. I'm not sure. I just know the dead guy treasured it. When he picked it up and pressed a finger into it, he felt its remarkable elasticity. Looks like valuable leather. Squad leader, you should take it. Keep that belly of yours from getting punctured. It seems like a good piece of gear. At REM's suggestion, Creyas examined the item. He had an eye for quality. They decided to keep it. A well-crafted piece of armor was worth far more to someone living by the sword than most weapons. This one's mine. No one objected. After sorting out the spoils, they left the remaining work to Creyas. Think they've cleared the snow by now? IM stepped forward again. Ingrid considered the time and glanced out the window. The snow hadn't melted yet. If they returned now, they might spend the night shoveling snow. It wasn't a tough decision. Ingrid murmured his thoughts, seeking his squad's consensus. Our mission ends tomorrow morning. By then, they wouldn't have to deal with the snow. Works for me. Seems there's plenty to do here still, REM agreed, settling in by the fireplace. For now, he was uncharacteristically docile. That was understandable. REM was savoring the warmth of his heated coat and the fireplace, immersed in thoughts of comfort and happiness. True, there's still much to do. On the other side of the fireplace, Ragnar had also found his spot. Yes, to spread the word of the divine. Odin added his thoughts. I'll return by morning, then. Jackson requested permission for some solo activities. At times like this, no one objected. They worked together seamlessly. If only they were always this cooperative. It was a recurring thought during this mission. Squad leader. Creyas called out to Ingrid and gave him a subtle thumbs up, a gesture of high praise. All squad members present and accounted for. We located the Thieves' Guild and wiped it out. Ingrid reported, addressing the company commander wrapped in a thick coat. It was the commander's private training ground. Even with fires lit on 2 tall poles, the day remained bitterly cold. On the frozen ground that felt like solid stone, the commander turned and questioned him. Wiped out? What did this man know to ask such a pointed question? Ingrid answered flatly. Yes, wiped out. We sent the ones fit for prison there and executed the rest who resisted. I see. The commander rotated her shoulders as if loosening them up. Did she truly know something? Of course, Ingrid couldn't openly say, Creyas took over the guild. We brought back the goods from their base as well. Good. Aside from a few heated furs and ornaments, everything was handed over to the commander. That was standard procedure. Any incidental gains from operations belonged to the unit. Of course, skimming a little here and there was an unspoken tradition. Well done. Fortunately, the commander didn't press further. Instead, her emerald green eyes locked onto Ingrid's blue ones as she made a proposal. About? Pardon? Don't you want to test the fairy sword? A sparring match. I hear you never decline. The fairy sword, light yet sharp, was well renowned. Ingrid had faced it a few times during his mercenary days. Encounters with fairies weren't uncommon in that line of work. But back then, his skills were laughable. Their sharp reflexes had rendered his mercenary blade useless, leaving him embarrassed to even call it a proper fight. Yes. A sparring match. It would be a rare opportunity. He had recently come to believe one thing. The more you fight, the more you gain. Ingrid knew he wasn't naturally talented. Experience was his best asset. Each battle honed him for the day when his skills would truly shine. Even without such rationale, he would never have declined. That was just who Ingrid was. Let's do it. Good. Come at me. The fairy commander drew her sword. Sheeing. Nada, the blade of the fairy. A real sword for a real duel. Ingrid unsheathed his own blade. Clang. Their long sword and Nada met in a swift clash. Ping. Both stepped back 2 paces simultaneously. Ingrid was cautious. He remembered the fairy commander effortlessly toppling him once in a medic's tent. How much had he improved since then? He didn't know. Now was the time to find out. Chapter 68, A Dream of Embracing a Woman, 1. Whoosh. The world spun. Thud. As his back hit the ground, the air was forced out of his lungs. If I threw you a bit harder, your ribs and internal organs might be damaged. Through the pain, Ingrid grimaced, and above him, the commander's musical voice rang out. Done. One more time. If he could, Ingrid would have gladly risked being beheaded to repeat this over and over. He knew he was outmatched. Rem had once glanced at the fairy commander and commented that once a straight-up monster. Ragnar had assessed the best among the commanders. Odin had added a finely honed body. Knowing he couldn't win didn't change anything. Ingrid gripped his sword with both hands. Come. The fairy commander remained the same as ever, calm and emotionless. Her sword came curving in. The Nada, crafted by the fairies, was a weapon that cut like a curve and, at some point, pierced like a dot. Earlier, he tried to dodge a thrust but allowed the commander to close the distance. This time, he stepped back and swung his long sword upward. In terms of strength, he had the upper hand. If he struck upward and deflected the fairy's sword, an opening would appear. He visualized the course of the battle in his head. Countless real battles, ones where his life was on the line, had honed this natural ability to predict fights. He anticipated his opponent's reaction and prepared for it. For the talented or those who perfected their skills in combat, this instinct was second nature. For Ingrid, it was a hard-earned weapon forged through near-death experiences. SHHHK. Just before the fairy commander's blade collided with his long sword, it bent fluidly. The nickname Leaf Blade was apt, it moved as if it had become a literal leaf. Softly, the blade curved. It was a feat of the commander's wrist, twisting and shaking to manipulate the blade. Ingrid, seeing the curve of the blade, exerted more strength to counter it. Ultimately, the upward swing missed, the blade slipping past. Ingrid cut nothing but air. It was a swordsmanship skill that could only be called an art. The fairy closed the distance again. This time, they came in close, right to his chest. Ingrid raised his knee in anticipation. Smack. The commander didn't evade. Instead, she pressed down on his knee with both hands. Before Ingrid could apply any real force, her pressure disrupted his balance. He knew it was coming but fell for it anyway. He thought grimly, I knew she'd go for close combat, and yet. Desperately, he tried a headbutt, but the commander tilted her head to avoid it and countered by ramming her shoulder into his forehead. What followed was similar to before, only the strike had changed. The commander clasped her hands together and struck Ingrid near his heart. Thud! For a moment, his breath caught again, and his limbs lost strength. If this had been a fight to the death, he might have bitten his tongue to keep going. But it was a spar. At this point, he'd already lost. Gah, huff, huff. Ingrid staggered back a few steps, then dropped to one knee, gasping for air. When he finally raised his head, he saw the commander's green eyes. More? She asked. Ingrid's chest ached fiercely, but he grinned. He was genuinely delighted that she hadn't stopped just because she'd won. And so, he charged again and again, getting beaten, collapsing, and charging anew. Got beaten up for not clearing the snow? Is that it? Back at the barracks, Rem, wrapped in heated leather, was the first to react. What? Why do you look like that? Who did it? Despite his words, he clutched his heated leather even tighter. Yeah, it was warm. Ingrid knew that. It was an especially cold day. What happened? Ragnar asked. For some reason, Jackson, who was at the barracks today, also stared intently at Ingrid, silently asking the same question. Odin muttered quietly, Why do you always come back beaten up, brother? When you say it like that, it makes me sound weak, Ingrid thought. He answered, It was a spar. With who? The commander. Our commander. Nod. Why? If you wanted to get beaten up, I could have done it. That bastard had a knack for irritating remarks. Ingrid ignored him. He had just finished cleaning himself up with superhuman willpower. Fortunately, the barracks had baths that provided hot water in exchange for a small fee. If not, he might have skipped bathing altogether. His entire body ached, and even moving a finger took effort. But it didn't matter. He could rest now. A couple of days of rest would suffice. He had no duties or training scheduled, so there was plenty of time. To recognize your efforts in maintaining order in the city, you are granted a 4-day leave. No bonus. The commander's words after their spar flashed in his mind. No duties meant no obligations. There was no bonus, but Ingrid considered the spar itself a reward. Besides, he still had the loot he'd taken from the crime guild. How many times was it? The number of times he'd sprawled on the frozen ground. His body had suffered, but he'd learned something. What I lack right now. The commander hadn't spoken much but had used her sword and fists to teach him. Refining his swordsmanship, focus, and the senses of a predator were fundamental. More importantly, Ingrid realized what he needed to fill within himself. You're dull, the commander had said, her final words cutting like a knife. But that didn't hurt him. His previous instructors had said far worse. If you must learn, then learn. Otherwise, go home and farm. I can't teach someone who's destined to die as a third-rate swordsman. The better the teacher, the harsher the words. The commander had called him dull, but even within that dullness, Ingrid had found what he sought. A lack of technique. Specifically, a lack of skill in controlling his body. The fairy commander had repeatedly thrown him down in the same way. She taught through her actions, and Ingrid absorbed those lessons through his body. He didn't miss a single opportunity to learn, like a hawk hunting prey. What I need. Wrestling, martial arts, hand-to-hand combat, grappling, all techniques for battle. Just because you wield a sword doesn't mean you fight only with a sword. Using your hands, feet, and body was just as important. Ingrid had employed these methods before, but it's clear I've never properly learned them. The commander's techniques were exceptional. The way she dashed in like she was crawling across the ground, disrupting balance in an instant, then locking and breaking knees, he had no way to counter it. What if he tried to draw a dagger and stab her? No, she'd disarm him, break his knee joint, and withdraw before he could. Not easy. It was a difference in skill, a disparity in what they had learned and mastered. But it was fun. His body ached as if broken, but he'd gained something valuable. More importantly, that knowledge had opened a new path for him, filling Ingrid with joy. As he moved to lie down, a panther poked its head out, its blue eye staring at him. I did promise to give it a name, didn't I? It would be troublesome if I didn't have a proper name to call it. As I leaned into the bed, the panther burrowed into my arms. A warm sensation spread through me. Somehow, the warmth seemed to ease my aching body, and I felt slightly better. How about calling it Heater since it's warm? Is that really a name? I.M. chimed in from the side. This guy really never misses an opportunity to interrupt. Is it strange? Is that even a name? Ragnar replied from the other side of the bed. He was lying down and couldn't be bothered to get up but was still managing to speak. Do you dislike the panther, brother? Even Audin was getting in on it now. Dislike it? Ingrid asked the panther, and the creature smacked him on the cheek with its front paw. It really must dislike the name. Ingrid muttered as he pulled the panther into his arms and fell into thought. What should I name it? I never thought I'd be agonizing over something like this. Blackie? No, it sounds like a puppy's name. Since its eyes are blue like a lake, how about calling it Blue Eyes? That doesn't sound too bad. The panther nestled closer into my arms, and with its chest tapping against mine, it almost seemed like it was reading my thoughts and rejecting everything I was thinking. Do you dislike Blue Eyes too? Then, what should I call it? How about Black Panther? That would be easier, I guess. Thud. The leopard pressed its paw firmly against my chest. Seeing it repeatedly nuzzle me, it seemed like it really didn't like the idea. Can you read my thoughts? During an external operation, I had spent the night with the comrades of those I had killed. It was strange that REM, snoring like a dead man, and Ragnar, who appeared to be in a similar state, could sleep so soundly in such a situation. Some level of tension was necessary. That's why I couldn't get a proper rest at the thieves' den. I had only managed to doze lightly, barely getting any sleep. Upon returning, I had reported right away and immediately engaged in training. That too was a series of brutal sparring sessions, rolling on frozen ground. As a result, my body was exhausted. After washing with warm water, I wrapped myself in heated leather and covered it with a blanket, feeling the warmth seep into my body. The warmth from the panther helped too. Its gentle pouring and rhythmic pressing made it hard to stay awake. Ingrid was half asleep, his mind wandering. "What's your name?" This state, half in a dream and half in reality, could be called a semi-conscious state. In that state, when I fell asleep, I dreamed. In my dream, a beautiful woman with dark hair and blue eyes appeared. Her wide, sharp eyes and straight nose seemed to reflect her proud personality. I thought she was an aloof beauty, flawless and unyielding. A vast meadow full of white, red, yellow, and blue flowers. She stood alone in the middle of it all, shining like a star among the flowers. A star that illuminated all the flowers. "She's beautiful," Ingrid muttered. His voice reached her across the meadow, a peculiar feature of dreams. And then, "My name is Esther." She spoke. That voice also reached Ingrid, crossing space and distance. The meadow vanished, and so did she. Half asleep, Ingrid muttered in his sleep. "Esther, let's call you Esther." "Were you dreaming?" REM asked from the side, but Ingrid, already asleep, didn't answer. REM tilted his head, watching the squad leader sleeping soundly. Even if someone were exhausted, they wouldn't fall asleep that deeply. "Must be really tired," REM muttered. It seemed like the company commander had worked the squad leader hard. And he didn't particularly like it. The fairy company commander was an enigmatic one. Why would she push his squad leader around like that? Who gave her permission? Grumble. As if reacting to the name Esther, the panther in the squad leader's arms let out a pleased sound. "Yeah, we'll call you Esther." "You." REM said it jokingly, and then closed his eyes, content with the warmth. He hated the cold. It was absolutely dreadful. Wasn't there supposed to be no duty for 3 days? REM thought he wouldn't leave his heated leather unless it was for food or necessities. The lake panther, Esther, picked up a familiar scent from Ingrid. It was a fragrance tied to spells, mystery, and secrets. In truth, if one got too close, it would be near a curse. It only stayed on the surface. The mysterious force called a curse around Ingrid had no effect and left only traces. From her experience, it seemed like a spell trap someone had set had been activated. It triggered but didn't work. Why the curse only lingered, she had an idea. Though it was just an idea. With her current body, she couldn't prove anything. She wanted to know more, to dig deeper, but now was not the time. To be precise, it wasn't something worth investigating. She savored the energy from the spell's lingering scent, drawing in the remaining power without affecting Ingrid. The cursed thoughts and will had vanished, leaving only pure energy, mana. Esther drank it all in. It was a sweet fragrance. A part of the world of spells that she hadn't tasted in so long. In the meantime, she projected herself into the man's dream, trying to force a name upon him. "My name is Esther." She made sure her name was properly delivered. She couldn't leave it like this. In the world of spells, a name held great significance. Especially now, with her condition not being the best. If she were given a new name in her current state, the curse would deepen. Thus, she had to reveal her true name. That was the reason she appeared in his dream. Was it because of the mana left in Ingrid's body and the image she projected in his dream? For a moment, Esther regained her original form. Naked, she was cradled in the arms of the man she had chosen. The man drew her closer. Esther blushed furiously, as she had never allowed anyone to hold her so intimately. But no one saw her. The man's strong chest muscles were just inches from her face. Esther only exhaled quietly, not daring to move. It wasn't the time to make noise. Her original form only lasted a moment. The man's eyelids fluttered open. His eyes were heavy with sleep, not focused. The moment their gazes met, Esther was so startled she forgot to breathe. The man gazed at her blankly, then slowly closed his eyes again. Still half asleep. During that time, Esther transformed back into a panther. It was magic's mystery. When the man opened his eyes again, he closed them and fell back asleep. Esther, Esther. He muttered her name in his sleep. He wouldn't remember, would he? She was glad she reverted to being a panther. Being naked in the arms of a man who was, strictly speaking, not a complete stranger was not something she ever wanted to imagine. And then, Esther regretted it. Thank goodness for the curse. She didn't even think of making a mistake like that. But since it was her first time in such a situation, she didn't know how to react. The panther hesitated for a moment, then stayed still. The mana left in the man's arms continued to draw her in. She thought it was only the mana influencing her and buried herself in his warmth. Just as Ingrid felt the warmth of the panther felt his warmth too. For a brief moment, she had regained enough strength to take some action in her panther form. It would take more time to fully return to her original self. Soon. It was just a matter of time. If she stayed with this man, it would happen. If not, she never would have sought him out. His face isn't bad. Even Esther had to admit Ingrid was a rare beauty. Though she didn't think that was the important thing. Chapter 69, A Dream of Embracing a Woman, 2. Ingrid had a dream. There was a field of flowers and a woman. I'll be staying for a while, so just know that. She was a woman of mysterious charm. Even though Ingrid wasn't the type to pay attention to women, she seemed unlikely to be easily forgotten. The dream was chaotic. It shifted from a field of flowers to a black river, then a ferryman appeared, followed by the woman, and suddenly, a panther showed up. What are you doing here? He thought to himself, but the panther shook its head, then, perhaps in annoyance, turned its head sharply away. It was so cute that Ingrid couldn't resist scratching the panther's head with a finger. Go. The lake panther was said to be a wild beast, but in moments like this, it was more like a cat. It made a contented purring noise. The sound was endearing, even to Ingrid. Then, for a brief moment, his eyes opened, but it was hard to tell whether this was a dream or reality. In front of him, the woman from the flower field and the black river was in his arms. And she was naked. When he blinked, the woman was gone, and he saw the leopard's head instead. It seemed like it had been a dream after all. But it still feels. The heavy feeling from holding something remained. The scent and warmth, something he couldn't get from a small panther, lingered, making it feel even stranger. This dream felt too real. He was drifting back to sleep, and this time, he didn't fight it. When he woke up in the morning, the panther, which never left his arms before he was awake, was nowhere to be found. Panther! Esther! Ingrid was about to call out casually when he remembered the name he had come up with in his sleep. Then, from the side, he saw the lake panther standing upright, moving. It was perfectly hidden in the shadow of the lodging, hard to spot unless you looked closely. It had eyes like a lake and fur as dark as ebony. It stepped lightly, clicking its claws on the ground, then sat down in a rather aloof manner. It sat on the leather mat Ingrid had set up for it in a corner of the lodging. Naturally, it was heated leather. I'd gone from being comfortably well off to living in luxury. Even the panther was now grooming its claws on heated leather. Whether it had been placed there by Big Eyes or REM, there was dried meat laid out. The panther lazily chopped the meat with its claws and began chewing it. But something felt empty. Was it because the little creature that had kept him warm in his arms was no longer there? Or was it because the dream had felt too real? He felt like he could even draw the woman from the dream in detail, though his drawing skills were terrible. But the memory was vivid enough. She was beautiful. Her beauty was exceptional. As impressive as the fairy commander, who boasted the beauty of a non-human. What are you thinking so hard about? I had a dream, and it stayed so vividly in my mind. Esther looked at Ingrid, and the panther's gaze was strange. When she spoke her name in the dream, it might have left a stronger impression than she had thought. If he had weaker willpower, it could have even caused mental stress. So, what should she do now? Should she figure out how to handle it while in panther form? The panther looked serious. What kind of dream was it? REM asked, still curled up on the heated leather mat. Are you a caterpillar? Correct. I'm a caterpillar. A caterpillar with a big mouth. So, feed me breakfast, or this week little caterpillar will starve to death. This guy was definitely batshit crazy. Ingrid let REM's words go in one ear and out the other. He was the type who could handle that. So, what kind of dream was it? I asked again. Ingrid scratched his chin and answered. It was a strange dream. Strange? I tilted his head. Since only his head was visible, all his expressions were conveyed through his face and head. It was a skill, if anything. I saw a naked woman. Ooh. Choke, choke. Ingrid's eyes turned toward the panther. The panther seemed to be choking, probably because a piece of dried meat had gotten caught in its throat. Esther. The panther didn't respond, keeping its head down, ignoring him. It was the same panther who radiated mystery from its entire body when they first met. A beast among beasts, the owner of the green pearl. A panther with eyes like a lake, the lake panther. Now, this beast was lying down on the floor, salivating and coughing. Ooh. At this rate, he wondered if it was going to die. I've never seen a panther choke on dried meat before, but was she pretty? She was very beautiful. But Ingrid didn't answer. What was the point? It had been just a dream. Are you too slow because of the winter? Ingrid stood up and began to move. Once he was standing, he realized there wasn't a spot on his body that didn't hurt. Moving was painful. But if he stayed still, his body would just deteriorate further. He knew this from experience. Not that he needed training. In the past, he would have been too eager and pushed his body harder, but he had learned that would only damage him more. Now he knew to avoid that. He wasn't in a rush anymore. Rest is also part of training. That was something he had heard from countless swordsmanship masters. If he loosened up today, tomorrow would be easier. The monk exercises he learned from Audin were enough to do that. So, was she pretty? What's the point? It was just a dream. He gave a vague response and left. It was cold again today. His whole body hurt, but he started stretching. His mind wasn't busy. In fact, after rolling around in training, things became clearer. It had always been a question. What should I do next? For those with talent, those called geniuses, the path seemed to open up whether they wanted it or not. Finding what was needed, what was lacking, was also a form of talent. But what about those who don't have talent? They try this and that. That's where the time gets spent. The starting line is different. That's why a good teacher is necessary. A teacher who can point out what's lacking is always like a treasure. This time, the fairy commander had helped with some of that. Now, the rest needed to be filled by someone else. Audin. In the morning, Audin would come out. Cold? He wasn't the type to worry about such things. Was it any wonder they called him the praying bear? Surely, it wasn't just because of his massive frame. Yes, brother, it's a fine day, isn't it? A biting wind howled between the two. The border guard stood in the far north of the Penhanial continent, an especially cold region even within its frigid boundaries. The overcast sky made the morning appear mottled and dull, though such details hardly mattered to Audin. He was the type of man who greeted each day as it came, rain, shine, or snow. Granted, he never went so far as to wish anyone a good morning when snow was falling. It is, Ingrid replied. What difference did the weather make? Actually, it was a good day. Any day spent learning something new was a good day. Teach me wrestling. Ingrid was always the same, direct and unwavering. He pursued his goals with a clear purpose and relentless determination. That was why he'd built such strong bonds with his squad members over time. Audin tilted his head in curiosity. This man, this squad leader, was truly unique. Watching Ingrid's skills improve noticeably in just a few days made Audin wonder what kind of fortune drove such progress. To Audin, Ingrid was like a blazing flame, burning so brightly that it consumed everything around it, perhaps even unaware of its own destruction. But that flame also provided warmth and light to those in its presence. When Audin first joined the squad, he had been at a low point, disillusioned, nearly defeated. And then he met Ingrid for the first time. What are you doing? It was their first encounter. Ingrid had been swinging a crude club outside the barracks, not just any club, but a makeshift one bound from 3 waterlogged logs tied together with string. Strength training, Ingrid replied. Swinging something heavy didn't necessarily guarantee strength gains. If anything, it risked injury. Audin figured Ingrid would give up after a few days. But he didn't. Ingrid's persistence was unwavering. Whether on the battlefield, during guard duty, in the rain, or under snow, he carved out time to swing his sword. Audin thought back to the man he had been then. 2 words sufficed, utterly broken. One day, his curiosity got the better of him. Why do you do this every day, even though your skills are lacking? They'll improve eventually, Ingrid answered, his expression calm. He simply resumed his training, unbothered by the question. Watching him, Audin felt like he'd been struck by lightning. How is he like this? What drives him? What faith sustains him? It wasn't religion. Effort was a talent in itself, but without a foundation to build on, even effort wouldn't last. Yet Ingrid defied that logic. He was someone betrayed daily by his own efforts, yet he kept moving forward, one step at a time. Who are you? Audin began observing his squad leader more closely. In doing so, he realized how trivial his own despair had been. Faith isn't something you give with the expectation of a reward. That day, Audin resumed his prayers. Brother, you'll destroy your joints at this rate, he said, beginning to offer advice on Ingrid's training regimen. Audin had a keen eye for human bodies, honed through tireless observation and effort. Some compared him to frogs, who were naturally gifted talent appraisers. While frogs identified innate potential, Audin could gauge the condition and training of the human body with precision. What he saw in Ingrid confirmed that this man faced greater physical challenges than most. His skeletal frame and muscle quality were far from ideal for a warrior. But giving up? That wasn't who Ingrid was. You'll need to build your body first. Are you ready for that? Audin asked, the cold wind still biting at them. Since the day he resumed praying, Audin had decided every morning was a good one, except when it snowed. Of course. It's going to hurt. That's fine. Dying would be worse, Ingrid thought. It'll be painful, Audin emphasized. No problem. It wouldn't hurt more than being stabbed and dying on a battlefield. What I'm about to teach isn't just some monk's calisthenics. It's a technique I developed, the isolation technique. The ominous name didn't deter Ingrid. If he was going to learn, he wanted to learn it properly. The isolation technique, Audin explained, involves training both the mind and body. Ready? Ready, Ingrid nodded. And so it began. A low groan escaped Ingrid's lips as he struggled with the excruciating exercises Audin put him through. This is just the start, brother, Audin said calmly. Ingrid began to wonder if Audin worshipped some kind of demon. The initial stretches were deceptively simple, just loosening the body, or so Audin claimed. But soon, Ingrid found himself in contorted positions that felt like his muscles were being torn apart. Relax and press your heels to your hips, Audin instructed, pushing down on Ingrid's legs with an iron grip. Imagine dying twice, Audin added. Ingrid already was. The training continued relentlessly, with Ingrid enduring wave after wave of pain. Your limits are clear to me, brother, Audin remarked. Why do you know my limits better than I do? Ingrid thought bitterly. But despite everything, he smiled. Because even amidst the agony, he felt a glimmer of hope, an expectation of growth. A month passed, and the changes in Ingrid's body became undeniable. Though the initial agony had nearly broken him, the progress was worth it. And so, the flame continued to burn, brighter and steadier than ever. Chapter 70, The Isolation Technique. The foundation of the isolation technique was simplicity. It was about enhancing physical capabilities by repeatedly performing movements while carrying heavy loads. This wasn't just about building raw strength, it was a practice to develop holistic physical control and endurance. Shall we begin? A month had passed, and the chill lingered in the far corner of the training ground. Ingrid proposed a sparring session, and Audin nodded with a smile. Do you prefer your arms or legs, brother? It was a signal, he was planning to target one or the other. Your tongue is sharp, Audin. Both were barehanded. They hadn't spent the entire month solely on the isolation technique, though. The two squared off, their gazes locking. To meet Audin's eyes, Ingrid had to tilt his head upward, the difference in their physiques glaringly apparent. Yet, it was Audin who moved first. With a soft thud, he pushed off the ground, lowering his stance as he charged forward, moving so fast that he left an afterimage. It was uncharacteristic of someone nicknamed the Praying Bear. In the past, Ingrid's best response would have been to raise his knee defensively. But now, things were different. Ingrid also lowered his stance, clenched his fist, and raised his thumb, pointing it forward as if ready to pierce. If Audin charged head-on, he'd risk his eyes being gouged. Audin abruptly halted his charge and shifted to the side, his massive frame bouncing like a leopard's agile leap. Despite his size, his speed and reflexes were akin to Esther's, swift and precise. Not allowing his back to be taken, Encrid repeatedly turned to face him. At some point, Audin's fist shot forward, reaching Encrid's range without warning. When the distance had been closed, even Encrid wasn't sure. In that concentrated moment, Encrid acted decisively, tilting his forehead to intercept the punch before it struck fully, a wrestling technique to mitigate damage. However, Audin opened his palm mid-strike, grabbing Encrid's hair instead. Yanking it downward, he drove his left elbow into Encrid's back, using his weight to press him down. For a moment, Encrid resisted Audin's strength and weight. Not content with merely enduring, he attempted to flip Audin over his back. But Audin wasn't one to passively mount his opponent. Adding pressure, he pulled Encrid's hair forward. The perfectly timed tug disrupted Encrid's balance, making him lose control of his body. With no options left, he fell. Thud. Encrid shielded his face with his hands as Audin pinned him down. "You sacrificed your body instead of your arms or legs, brother squad leader," Audin laughed heartily. "If this were a battlefield, I'd have a helmet," Encrid replied, referencing his hair being grabbed. Still pinned, he spoke, and Audin answered with a grin. "Then I'd have used another method." It was true, and Encrid wasn't complaining. He'd only asked out of curiosity about the alternative. "If there was a helmet, I'd grab the nape or press the back of the head to pin you instantly." "I see." Even under the crushing weight of the praying bear, Encrid prioritized absorbing the lesson. Audin eventually stood up, brushing himself off. For Encrid, the past month had been a routine, not monotonous, but methodical. Mornings were dedicated to the isolation technique, followed by wrestling after lunch. Until evening, he practiced swordsmanship. After dinner, he revisited everything he'd learned. The heart of the beast, the sense of the blade, and singular focus, all had room for improvement. If there was potential for growth, why stop? Still, progress was slow, even with these techniques supporting him. Thus, Encrid crawled forward, like a slow-moving snail or a tortoise on land. "You're improving at a snail's pace," Audin remarked, adjusting his clothes, white puffs of breath rising into the cold air. Both were drenched in sweat from their efforts in the isolation technique and wrestling. Encrid replayed Audin's teachings in his mind, finding them invaluable. One particular lesson stood out, reading through the body. The body carried all the information one needed. For example, a right-hand swordsman typically had a more developed right arm. By analyzing physique and muscle development, one could gauge their opponent's experience and training. This was a revelation Encrid had gained through his training in the isolation technique. What followed was equally valuable. After building his foundation, he learned wrestling from Audin. Audin categorized wrestling into strikes, joint locks, and throws. If your opponent is smaller, simply throwing and slamming them makes the fight easier. What if I'm the smaller one? Encrid not only listened attentively but also asked many questions, never glossing over anything. Audin admired this trait in his squad leader. In that case, you'd fight as a smaller person should. Master joint locks, strikes, and grapples to use their strength against them. Counters are a prime example of this. It reminded Encrid of the technique used by the ferry company commander, the effortless gesture that had toppled him. Audin demonstrated such techniques with precision. He was kind, despite being devilishly strict during the isolation technique. While teaching wrestling, he was calm and patient. Apply more pressure here, and their arm breaks. Without divine healing, the damage would be permanent. A single mistake could result in Encrid's dismemberment, so wrestling became a careful endeavor. Strength and speed are essential, but so is understanding vital points, takedown techniques, and breaking bones or joints. None of these can be half-learned. So instead of learning new things, you must repeat what you've already learned. Do you still crave something new? Audin occasionally scolded him, and rightfully so. Encrid preferred learning a wide array of techniques over mastering a single one. This is the right way. Encrid believed in today's repetition. It was impossible to master any technique immediately. While Audin might see him as overly ambitious with a body unable to keep up, to Encrid, this was the correct path. Audin's voice interrupted his thoughts. "Why do you think your hair was grabbed earlier?" "The distance." Ingrid answered plainly, he hadn't been caught off guard. Exactly. The distance. Despite countless reminders, you remain slow and dull, Commander Brother. Ingrid was unfazed. Words like that didn't hurt him, he didn't have the time for it. He was too busy replaying what he'd learned today. Joint locks alone came in dozens of varieties, and memorizing and embedding even a fraction of them into his body was overwhelming. Ingrid had to master both throws and strikes, engraving the basic principles into his body. I've told you many times, stamina is essential, reading distance is no different from swordsmanship, and without agility, everything else is meaningless, Audin said. Audin was an excellent teacher, not because his methods were remarkable, but because of his persistence. He doesn't know how to give up. Even when progress was slow and almost invisible, Audin taught steadfastly. For someone like Ingrid, such a teacher was a perfect match. Persistent instruction left even a small imprint on the body and mind, and Ingrid, in turn, learned with equal determination, setting mastery and refinement aside for the future. Stamina, distance, mobility, Ingrid repeated Audin's words to himself. Be it swords, spears, blunt weapons, or wrestling, strength and speed were indispensable. While Ingrid had grown familiar with measuring distances, Audin was still more adept, often catching him off guard. Did you end up rolling in the dirt again today? After finishing his wrestling session, Ingrid returned to find Rem waiting for him. Taking a break today? It was the same question as always. No. This time, it was the sword. Although he still practiced with a wooden one occasionally, he now preferred a real blade. The long sword he was accustomed to wielding aimed at Rem's entire body. Ingrid didn't always spar with Rem. On some days, it was Ragnar. Watching you makes me want to give it a try, squad leader, Ragnar would say. On other days, it was Jackson. I've got time. Grab your sword and come out. None of them ever declined Ingrid's requests. Still, they shared similar thoughts. Take Rem, for instance. What a waste of talent. Does he need more combat experience? On the battlefield, his skills had improved rapidly, but back in the city, he seemed stagnant. Though he had undeniably improved compared to before, there was no dramatic growth. That much was clear to Rem. What had improved were his heart of the beast, his focus mind, his sense of the blade, and his isolation technique. The isolation technique was altering his muscle quality, but even after a month, there were no drastic changes, only small, incremental progress. He advanced like a slow snail crawling forward, step by painstaking step. Ragnar had similar thoughts. His fundamentals are solid, but why is his advanced technique progressing so slowly? Wasn't he supposed to have a breakthrough in his 30s? Why was he regressing to being a fool? It was a mystery. And yet, Ragnar remained motivated. Ingrid had a way of inspiring those around him. Every day, regardless of duties or other circumstances, he repeated the same grueling training. If he had morning duties, he would lift rocks and hold peculiar postures late into the night. The same went for wrestling and swordsmanship. When duty called, he would serve, then return to resume his training. He carved time out of his sleep and meal breaks. During group drills with the regular army, while Rem, Ragnar, Jackson, Audin, and Kreia sometimes slacked off or went through the motions, Ingrid gave it his all. Afterward, he returned to the training grounds to continue his personal regimen. His consistency was almost frightening. That's why Ragnar found himself motivated by the captain. Jackson felt the same. The sense. Ingrid's hearing was sharp enough to feel like he had eyes in the back of his head, yet his overall sensory acuity hadn't advanced beyond that. Why? Was it Jackson's fault as the teacher? Or Ingrid's fault as the learner? It's the learner's fault. Having taught numerous others, Jackson knew this well, and it left him amazed. Ingrid's progress was painfully slow, yet he never gave up. It's unique. Jackson nearly smiled in satisfaction but reverted to his usual expressionless face. Why should I care so much about the captain? Still, he always gave his best effort. Teaching interns had naturally established a rotation, and Jackson was the most diligent among them. Esther watched the man she had chosen. The Black Panther's blue eyes followed his every move. How could someone be like that? There was a time when Esther, too, had been consumed by the world of spells. Back then, she needed nothing else, not food, not sleep, not even desire. And that's how I ended up like this. Lost in her past for a moment, she turned her gaze back to Ingrid. He's different from me. His daily routine was simple and repetitive. Even eating, sleeping, and resting seemed to be part of his regimen. He was someone who rested earnestly. Watching him, she found herself thinking, if there's a way to help, I want to. He was that kind of person. Unaware of these sentiments, Ingrid was too occupied to notice anything around him. He was busy engraving various techniques into his body. A training fanatic by nature, his intensity had only grown recently, thanks to the isolation technique. The quality of my muscles is changing. He almost wanted to strip down and admire himself in the mirror. Who would notice the change most keenly if not Ingrid himself? When movements that used to be difficult became smooth, the joy was nearly overwhelming. From thrusting techniques to the basics of heavy swordsmanship, everything felt different with his changed body, smoother and more fluid. Even the techniques of soft swordsmanship had become somewhat second nature to him. Clang! The swords met, and Ingrid redirected REM's axe to the side. That's a bit better. REM acknowledged his deflection. It wasn't perfect, but it was an improvement. It's better than before. Ingrid, too, could sense the refinement in his techniques. All of it stemmed from the bodycrafting method, the isolation technique. Do you regret not learning it sooner? Audin had once asked him, wondering if he thought it was too late to reshape his body. No. Ingrid had shaken his head. He held no regrets for the past. If he did, he'd already be trapped in yesterday. What he had learned back then was vital for that time. Thus, being fully present in today was the right choice. Once, during that month, he dreamed of the ferryman. You live as if trapped in it today, the ferryman had said, exuding boredom as he leaned on his chin before vanishing. The same one who had mocked him so fiercely before was now nowhere to be seen. The ferryman's words rang true. Ingrid's days were a repetitive cycle. Only the duty schedules and weather changed. If you would have learned it earlier, your body wouldn't have been ready for it, Audin had said, but Ingrid paid it little mind. What mattered was today, and now. Eventually, the harsh winter, the fourth and most grueling season, reached its midpoint. Let's talk for a moment. One day, amidst these routines, the ferry company commander came looking for Ingrid. Standing outside the barracks, the commander, with his green eyes and back to the cold, said bluntly, "It's a mission." The border guard reserves were often mobilized as needed. Their duty wasn't limited to fighting on the battlefield. Understood. You'll escort the heir of a merchant guild. Pick one from your squad to accompany you. The commander delivered the orders. It was a directive from above, and Ingrid had to comply. An assignment and a mission. He didn't particularly enjoy such tasks. But now, he had begun to take an interest in earning merits. Mastery and accomplishments, these were the steps to knighthood. Chapter 71, Rumors Fly on Wings of Light. That body of yours, it's finally worth looking at, brother. This level of skill isn't bad for the basics. You won't be falling to just any blind sword now. Your responses are decent, just that much. Head, looks like your sword is finally sticking to your hand? And has the heart of the beast ripened as well? These were the words of each squad member. Without needing to dwell on it, all their comments pointed to the same conclusion: his skills had improved. For Ingrid, such growth held a profoundly special meaning. It was the thread tying him to his dreams, the moonlight piercing through his darkest nights, and the dawn that heralded a new morning. A sliver of light had seeped into his tattered and faded dreams. That sliver of light became the foundation to revive his dreams. A knight is a name built upon honor and perfected through skill. Ingrid didn't aspire to be a mercenary or warrior of knightly caliber, he wanted to be a knight. If asked why, he might struggle to provide an answer. There was a faint itch in his chest, though it wouldn't easily find its way into words. He could lie, but even that he disliked. Ingrid was stubborn in matters like these. The injustices he had witnessed during his mercenary days fueled his refusal to abandon his dream. Yet, that wasn't the only reason. Why does one dream? Simply because one longs for it. He wanted to hear others cheer for him. He enjoyed the time spent honing his swordsmanship. He cherished the moments of banter with those around him. And he desired to confront those who had once dismissed and cast him aside, showing them how much he had changed. A tangle of desires, intertwined and mixed. The human heart is never simple. For Incrid, this bundle of desires culminated in one word. Knight. It was his dream. Even if he lacked the skills now and the path ahead seemed distant. As long as a path toward his dream existed, he wanted to walk it. Thus, building honor became part of his purpose. He also wanted to test himself. Just how far can my sword take me? Though sparring was constant with his squad mates. He had defeated Mitch Herrier in battle, won his promotion duel, and survived an assassination attempt by a half-blood fairy. Still, today's Incrid wasn't the same as he was then. He clenched and opened his hand. I want to fight. He yearned for a moment when he could wield his sword purely to prove himself. He had been promoted to a high soldier rank. Even so, disparities existed within that rank. His growing skills bred both ambition and curiosity. He craved to test his abilities in real combat. That was when the mission came in. And with the company commander accompanying them, it wouldn't be an easy task. Why, though? Why is the company commander coming in person? That was Incrid's question. Surely others had similar doubts. For the company commander, it was just a detour on his way, nothing more. But for other platoon leaders, it seemed unusual. In particular, for Incrid's direct superior, the 4th platoon leader, this was a perplexing matter. Though it was purely coincidental, some people struggled to see coincidences for what they are. The Border Guard Standing Army often provided its military services to citizens and merchant guilds. This was one of the dual policies established by Norilia. The first was the soldier ranking system, and the second was the soldier mercenary system. Instead of relying on mercenaries, soldiers would undertake missions. This system, along with the ranking policy, had become one of the kingdom's most successful strategies. Border Guard soldiers are reliable, became a common sentiment. Replacing mercenaries with soldiers to handle missions naturally gained the approval of citizens and guilds alike. Mercenaries were rough and unruly, whereas soldiers were disciplined. Like any well-regulated unit, they followed orders diligently. Moreover, their services were cheaper than those of large mercenary guilds. Shouldn't escorting citizens for city security be an obvious duty? Charging krona for every little thing feels excessive, doesn't it? Occasionally, grumbling merchants would raise such complaints. But after using the escort soldiers even once, those complaints disappeared entirely. The Border Guard Standing Army engaged in 2 local wars annually. Stationed in a military city near the front lines, their soldiers naturally underwent constant filtering through battle and death, raising the overall standard of skill. Cost, skill, safety. All 3 factors contributed to high satisfaction, marking the policy as a success. The company commander's decision to accept the mission was part of this system. But why? Many still pondered the same question. This mission wasn't significant enough for the company commander to personally intervene. Even the platoon leaders, despite keeping their mouths shut for propriety, understood their commander wasn't someone of average caliber. Couldn't she even face off against the frontier defense leader? The frontier defense captain was the strongest in the border guard. Leaving the battalion commander out of the equation, of course. The heavy armor company commander should be a fair match. The ferry company commander has already proven her combat prowess in the field. I'll take this mission myself. So, when the ferry company commander chose to take on a mission, no one could object. Why are you taking this on personally? Asked the 4th platoon leader. To bring along our troublemaking squad leader. That was her answer. A mission is just a mission, nothing remarkable in itself. The issue lay with who was accompanying him. The spellbreaker, Incrid, now a high-ranking soldier. The 4th platoon leader, who had risen purely through wit, pondered deeply. Once the ferry company commander left, the 4th platoon leader combed through his memories. Cleverness stems from information. Lagging behind in understanding the surrounding circumstances would harm his prospects for promotion. Dutifully, he recalled the past. Didn't she visit the medical barracks back then, too? The ferry company commander had personally visited Incrid right after his appointment. She even went out of her way to visit the medical barracks. Later, she held several private meetings with Incrid. Furthermore, private meetings with other platoon leaders were rare, if they happened at all. It was fortunate to get any proper answers. The company commander had once interfered in Incrid's promotion match. The 4th platoon leader had witnessed it as well. It was during that fight with the border defense troops. Back then, it had appeared to the 4th squad leader that the commander stepped in to protect Incrid, who seemed to be in danger. Moreover, on a snowy day, the commander had specifically ordered the troublemaker squad to go out. They only returned the next morning after clearing all the snow. And they even brought heated leather. What had they been doing? The operation was classified, and the details were only reported directly to the commander, so he didn't know. It was also said that the two had sparred alone in the private training yard. But why? The infirmary meetings, private encounters, the promotion match, the snowy day mission, the sparring sessions, and even their assignments. All the information blended together, forming a conclusion in the 4th platoon leader's mind. Chills ran down his spine at his own speculation. Although his reasoning was misguided and filled with misunderstandings and foolish thoughts, he felt a strong sense of conviction about his theory. Thus, one thought came naturally. Could it be the two of them? He imagined the fairy and the troublemaker squad leader standing side by side. Surprisingly, the picture seemed to fit well. Nah, that can't be right. Even though he felt deeply convinced, he muttered to himself in denial. What can't be? A subordinate nearby asked. It was a mundane moment during guard duty. The 4th platoon leader cautiously shared his suspicion. Had it been dismissed as nonsense, it would have ended there. Whoa, no way. The subordinate's reaction was peculiar. His pupils trembled as if he was genuinely shocked. He seemed equally shaken. While Border Guard wasn't a small town, rumors spread quickly. Certain kinds of rumors, in particular, traveled faster than winged horses. The idlers in the unit, especially the women managing the baths and preparing meals, thrived on this kind of gossip. Thanks to them, the rumor gained wings of light and spread swiftly through the unit. In less than a day, no one in the unit was unaware. Squad leader. I heard you're going to be a dad soon. Is it true? Creyas, who had returned to the unit after 3 days, asked directly. Where had it gone wrong? Ingrid tried to figure it out, but he couldn't pinpoint the cause. The rumor had already spread. At Creyas's words, REM clutched his stomach and burst into laughter. He laughed so hard that his heated leather shifted, exposing his bare feet. Kahaha. That's right. A dad. Big Eyes, did you hear about the mom too? Why yeah, I thought the rumor was ridiculous. I figured the kid part was exaggerated, but when did the commander get you wrapped up like this? Truly impressive, squad leader. When Creyas gave a thumbs up, Ingrid grabbed his thumb and pushed it back down. It's a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. Someone started a strange rumor. It was the 4th platoon leader, but Ingrid didn't know that. Even Creyas, who was adept at handling information, hadn't pieced it together. If they really tried to track down the rumor's origin, it wouldn't be impossible. But was it worth the effort? It wasn't life-threatening, after all. Not a bad deal, though. If you make her your partner and swordsmanship teacher. Ragnar chimed in. What on earth goes on in that guy's head? At times, it seemed worse than whatever nonsense REM spouted. Was he seriously suggesting marriage as a way to improve swordsmanship? Key. Next to them, REM was laughing so uncontrollably that it now sounded like a beast's cry. Don't get too attached. It'll hurt more when you're rejected later. Jackson spoke while folding his clothes nearby. Why is rejection already a foregone conclusion? The premise seemed completely skewed. Blessings, brother. Everyone was teasing while fully aware of the truth. They all knew Ingrid's routine. He barely had time for anything, let alone relationships. Let's drop it. It was just a baseless rumor. He thought so, reaching out to Esther. Snap. For some reason, Esther rejected his hand today. I'm not Creyas, Ingrid said, feeling wronged. But Esther glared sharply at him before stretching out on the heated leather. Why was she suddenly acting this way after spending all day nestled in his arms? She must be jealous. Comfort her a bit, REM quipped, then doubled over in laughter again. REM was undoubtedly insane. Thanks for the entertainment. Anyway, when are we leaving? For where? For the escort mission. You can only bring one person, right? And? Of course, it has to be me. REM flapped his leather cloak dramatically, half rising as he spoke, confidently pointing to himself. The heated leather draped across his shoulders, spreading like a cape before settling there. Are you doing this because I teased you? Let's be rational. Squad leader, that icy Jackson? If the escort says something snarky, it'll be chaos. Do you want to see a feral cat clawing at the escort target? Is this guy even hearing himself? Ingrid was stunned but kept his face neutral, signaling for him to continue. A lazybones like Ragnar wouldn't even care. Ragnar rarely volunteered for missions unless absolutely necessary. And you're not seriously considering Big Eyes, are you? Would you take on an extra escort target? That much was true. Kreis was never an option. And sure, the lump, Odin, is decent. But what if he starts mumbling prayers next to the escort target? All day long? The escort wouldn't appreciate it. REM's smooth-talking ability was impressive, especially for a Western immigrant. His argument made it sound like the only viable option was himself. But you're the biggest problem. Why did he assault his superior? Because of his temper. If it were a situation where beating the escort target to protect them was acceptable, fine. REM might work. But if that wasn't an option? If the escort target was even slightly temperamental? REM was out of the question. Not even half a day would pass before disaster struck. If Ingrid wanted to complete the mission without paying hefty penalties, REM was the worst choice. You're out. Absolutely. There was no need to think further, his answer was firm. Wow, I'm hurt. Especially the absolutely part. How do you plan to deal with this wound you've left on a grown man's heart? Still no. I'm going to go rogue. Ingrid ignored him. REM often spouted nonsense as if his brain were filled with pebbles. He scanned the unit. If you insist, fine. Ragnar, who met his gaze, said casually. As if. If Ragnar went, the mission wouldn't be an escort, it'd be a nap break. Ragnar, who loved his morning sleep, would be impossible to wake up. Can't send him alone either. He'd get lost. Ragnar's sense of direction was abysmal. The only choices left were Odin and Jackson. The decision was obvious. You're it, Ingrid said. Chapter 72, Refined Through Constant Training, 1. It was an obvious choice, so Jackson was selected. When it comes to assignments, it's only logical to work with the one most capable. Jackson had taken on the most assignments among the Troublemakers squad. This meant he had the most experience and, consequently, the most demand. His heightened senses were invaluable for escort missions, this didn't need repeating. Compared to the other squad members, the odds of him clashing with the escort target were also significantly lower. Understood. Jackson nodded naturally, while REM protested loudly, unable to accept the decision. Then Ragnar chimed in, expressing doubts about the logic of it all. Odin added his own comment, questioning whether this aligned with divine will. Predictably, this led to Ragnar and REM bickering. Jackson, observing from the side, made a sharp comment aimed at REM. Ragnar withdrew, leaving REM and Jackson to argue instead. Ingrid tried to mediate repeatedly, but by the end, he simply ordered them to avoid even looking at each other. If you're going to spar, do it with me, Ingrid concluded, wrapping up the day with one-on-one training sessions with the squad. One might expect mental exhaustion from such routines, but for Ingrid, this was standard. After all, someone who had endured long years wielding a sword despite his lack of talent wouldn't be fazed by this. If such mental strain had affected him, he'd have abandoned the sword long ago in favor of a plow. As expected of the squad leader, Kreis remarked, once again giving a thumbs up. It was another round of praise for Ingrid's steadfastness. He nodded slightly in acknowledgement. The escort mission was set for the following day. It involved a mid-sized merchant group dealing with a succession dispute requiring escort within the city. 3 personnel were assigned, the ferry company commander, Ingrid, and Jackson. There was no need to move at dawn, the escort target wasn't expected in the city until midday. The next morning, after a good night's sleep, Ingrid woke to find Esther nestled against him. Why did you act like that yesterday? Half asleep and groggy, he asked, only for Esther to give his chest a soft tap with her paw. Although the reason for her anger was unclear, it seemed like her way of making peace. All right, take it easy today. There wasn't much Esther needed to do. At night, she'd crawl into bed. In the morning, she'd laze around until she got up. Occasionally, she wandered outside, likely hunting mice near the city. Ingrid didn't usually prepare meals specifically for her but did hand out jerky as a treat. Surprisingly, the entire squad doted on Esther. Creyas, in particular, was especially attentive. Lake panthers shed their claws when the time comes. You won't mind if I collect them, right? Apparently, claw shedding was akin to molting. Creyas had a practical reason for his affection. You little rascal. Meow. Her nonchalant head tone was endearing. Amused, Ingrid scratched the top of her head a couple of times before getting up. It was breakfast time. Let's see how well you manage without me, Rem quipped. His glare caught Ingrid's attention, prompting a reflexive punch. Thud. Rem blocked it with his palm. Do you really think breaking an arm is no issue? Picking a fight first thing in the morning. No, it was reflexive when I saw your face. That's even more insulting. Fair enough. Despite his words, Rem didn't retaliate. After all, it was mission day. No point risking injury beforehand. Breakfast consisted of flattened, grilled pork tenderloin and boiled potatoes, a bland combination. This is good for you. Meat strengthens muscles, brothers, Audin remarked. Isolation technique emphasized building the body, and proper nutrition was key. Though it was unappetizing, Ingrid ate it without complaint, knowing the importance of proper sustenance. After spending the remaining time conditioning his body through isolation technique, it was time to depart. Ingrid washed at the well and geared up. He donned the leather armor he'd taken from the raid on the Gilpin Guild. It was a simple, flexible piece that only covered his torso but wasn't restrictive. Over the armor, he strapped the knife sheath for his whistle daggers. That? Jackson asked, gesturing toward the sheath. I picked it up from an assassin I killed. Thrifty, aren't you? If that's how it seemed, so be it. In any case, it was a useful tool, so it had been worth keeping. Weapons of this sort were always better in surplus. After layering on a thick gambeson, Ingrid completed his preparations and stepped outside. He walked alongside Jackson toward the cities in district. Along the way, Jackson offered tips on observation and listening skills. And of course, he couldn't resist adding, "You're so dull." Ingrid remained unfazed. He was well aware of his limitations. At the central crossroads, where Forins were located, the company commander was already waiting. Has the escort target arrived? Ingrid offered a brief military salute and asked. Not yet. Should be here soon. Rumor had it the escort target had quite the personality. That bit of information had come from Creyas, who seemed more attuned to gossip than ever since joining the guild. They're here to settle a succession issue, right? Though curious about their temperament, Ingrid wasn't overly concerned. Few could rival Rem in unruliness. Spending a month with the Troublemakers squad would make even the most troublesome individuals seem harmless. Ingrid remained at ease. Jackson had no particular thoughts. To him, a job was just a job. The task was simple, provide protection for 3 days. Once the succession meeting concluded, the mission would end. Ensuring safety within the city wasn't a complex matter. The company commander, observing Ingrid's composure, reflected on why he'd been brought along. The Troublemaker squad leader was a target of Aspin's assassins, a testament to his clean record. Moreover, his handling of the Thief Guild and subsequent actions had left a strong impression. He'd kept the bribes flowing and transformed a criminal guild into an information network. This avoided conflicts with higher-ups, who would have been displeased if the bribes had stopped. The commander had considered intervening if issues arose, but Ingrid had made that unnecessary. Not going as planned, but not bad either, the commander mused. As they waited for the escort target, the commander spoke. Were we involved at some point? Ingrid, resting his hand on his sword's hilt, momentarily froze. He turned his head slowly and asked, What do you mean? Well, if I can hear the rumors, you probably know them too. It's a misunderstanding. Just baseless gossip. Things have been slow lately, so people fill their time with nonsense. Is that so? Yes. So, what is our relationship? It's the one between a superior and a subordinate. I see. He dismissed the topic lightly. Rumors certainly spread far and wide. A whom? Jackson cleared his throat next to him. A quick glance revealed his twitching lips, evidence of suppressed laughter. You find this funny? He mouthed the word silently. I didn't laugh. Jackson mouthed back. The company commander, a fairy, caught their silent exchange with a mere sidelong glance. Lip reading was no challenge for a fairy. You must have been troubled. Not at all. Ingrid answered immediately. You seemed troubled. I wasn't. Then, did you enjoy it? Why was she doing this? Not, yes. His reply came out unusually drawn out. It would have been nice if he'd cracked a smile afterward, but his face remained impassive. Moreover, he didn't even meet her gaze, instead staring off toward the distant city. Fairy humor, he thought. It was something he never quite got used to. They're here. Jackson's words rescued Ingrid from the awkward situation. Their escort target had arrived. Thud, thud. As the two carriages approached, the ground trembled slightly. Ingrid figured dealing with the escort target would be far easier than handling the company commander. That was amusing, the commander whispered behind him, sending a chill down Ingrid's spine. Even though he was wearing a cloak lined with heated leather, he felt a shiver. The carriages stopped, and a figure disembarked. It wasn't what Ingrid expected. Rather than the puffed-up cheeks of a greedy toad, the person was a striking woman with long blonde hair and reddish-brown eyes. Her beauty was immediately striking. With a sharp click of her boots against the ground, she descended from the carriage, directly meeting the fairy commander's gaze. Please take care of me, she said. No introduction about her being the escort target from the standing army was necessary. From that moment on, she only conversed with her own entourage. The middle-aged woman by her side, likely her nanny, relayed the blonde's instructions to the escorts. She was said to be 20 years old, but her peculiar temperament was still a mystery. You'd have to talk to her to know, Ingrid thought. Having never exchanged even a glance with her, he couldn't say much. This job looks easy, Jackson remarked. Ingrid nodded in agreement. They had wondered if she would arrive alone, but 5 armed escorts accompanied her. 3 carried shields, and 2 wielded thin rapiers. Ingrid applied what he had learned. Age, posture, positioning, gaze, everything is information, brother, Audin had said. By observing their stances, he formed an outline of their physical capabilities and made educated guesses. Could I be right? He wasn't sure. Frogs were said to instinctively gauge their opponent's strength, but humans required knowledge and experience. It comes with practice, brother, Audin had reassured him, though it was clear this wasn't something mastered overnight. Ingrid wasn't impatient. He carefully observed the 5 escorts. One was left-handed. When sitting down, their chair creaked under their weight, suggesting they wore heavy equipment. However, no one wore chainmail armor. It was winter, the end of the season, often called the harshest cold. Who would wear metal armor unnecessarily? Walking alongside the carriage as an escort, a thick gambeson was the more practical choice. This group had followed that logic. Experience and common sense, paired with what he learned from Audin, allowed him to deduce much. Judging by their posture and equipment, they were all less capable than border guards. In terms of soldier ranking, they were below high level. Ingrid reflected on his observations. Not bad. Judging skill from posture and equipment was something he'd never dared to attempt before. Feeling this growth brought him joy, a feeling that never dulled. Each time it was new and exhilarating. Whether in swordsmanship, combat techniques, or martial arts, the progress was a source of relentless satisfaction. Even if there were no opportunities to draw his sword during this mission, simply applying and refining what he had learned brought immense joy. Shall we try a fun little game? Jackson's suggestion piqued his interest. It wasn't merely a game, it was a training method. Sound matching, Jackson explained. Let's do it, Ingrid replied. Like Audin and the others, Jackson had an intense passion for teaching. It was an invisible, cold flame, but it was impossible to miss. Since Ingrid was the beneficiary of that zeal, he couldn't refuse. As expected, it wasn't just a game. Jackson proposed one of the training methods for sharpening their senses to blade movements. Of course, it wasn't easy. The sound of a tongue clicking, Jackson said, and Ingrid frowned. Too slow. Escort missions were typically uneventful, especially here at Border Guard. Calling in reinforcements when private escorts were already present made it clear they wanted to deter anyone daring enough to attack. The Border Guard was under direct royal command. Challenging the royal forces within their own territory? Even the renowned Rengardi's caravan, known for their blank promissory notes, wouldn't dare. Third man at the left table, Jackson noted. How could he discern that just by listening? Ingrid was also honing his awareness, almost as if he had eyes in the back of his head. It was a simple yet challenging game. Jackson named a sound, and Ingrid focused on identifying its source. The sound of a blade being sharpened. The kitchen? No, it's higher up. Ingrid activated his full concentration. Sweat dripped from his forehead despite the chill in their corner of the inn. Above. Directions correct. Which floor? The inn had 3 floors. Should he guess? No, that wouldn't be proper training. Room 102, perhaps. Jackson revealed the correct answer. The key was timing, responding promptly. After a few rounds, the fairy commander joined them. Let me play. Her participation raised the stakes. With sharper senses than humans, fairies were a formidable challenge. The short blade, sheathing and unsheathing repeatedly. The question was posed again. Ingrid missed repeatedly, while the fairy commander answered without pause. Outside the inn entrance. The sound of concealed breathing. How did she even notice that? Although incredulous, Ingrid couldn't deny her accuracy. Just beyond the window. Someone crouching, holding their breath. Under the table to your right. Someone sneaking glances. Behind you. At some point, the game turned into something else entirely. The escort target, heir to a trade caravan, had brought personal guards and occupied part of the inn's main hall. And then? An attack is imminent. I agree. Ingrid finally grasped their conversation's meaning. Jackson stood abruptly, pushing his chair back. Scrape, thud. A gasp escaped as the back of the chair struck someone's thigh. A startled man holding a blackened dagger was revealed. Thanks to the sound training, Ingrid had been on edge. He turned swiftly, catching sight of another assailant with a dagger ready to strike. Startled, the attacker froze momentarily, allowing Ingrid to grab his wrist. Crunch. Twisting the wrist outward and pulling, Ingrid brought the man closer and struck his sternum with an elbow. Thud. The assailant dropped his dagger as his chest cracked. Ingrid caught the falling weapon and flung it toward a wooden pillar, where it stuck with a solid thunk. Someone might think he narrowly avoided the attack, but Ingrid had anticipated it all along. Everything's a lesson, after all, he thought.